Welcome to Cracked Open, a podcast about life, love, loss, and the truths we discover along the way. Together, we'll explore the struggles that shape us, the lessons we carry, and the hope that keeps us moving forward. This is more than stories. It's honesty, it's healing, it's real. Let's get started. And now your host, Glen Nunes.
Welcome to Cracked Open. I'm your host, Glen Nunes, and this is my 10th episode in the first series here. This one's going to be called Betrayal. And whether you're the one that's been betrayed or you're the betrayer, this might be a touchy one. And some people may like it, some people may not. I'm sure I'm going to get comments. But it's pretty much straightforward on what's going on in the world and what betrayal is all about. So that being said, I've been all over the board. Those of you know I've been on an emotional roller coaster. I go hour to hour. I say that in my last couple episodes. I don't go day to day anymore, or month to month, or week to week. But I said in my last episode in January, I'm considering moving possibly, and maybe considering quitting music altogether. I've been all over the board. If I stay, I might just keep my Thursdays. I don't know. I've been talking to people about it that are close to me, and people are obviously trying to persuade me to do other things. And I've been talking to somebody. Somebody's trying to get me to start a Christian band, like a worship band that's huge right now. And I've been also talking to people and considering speaking to one of the guys I play with about starting another country rock band type thing. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know where I'm just going to let this play out and see where life takes me. And I'm not going to make any harsh decisions or crazy choices right now. I'm just going to live my life, play out the rest of this crappy year and see what happens, and maybe it'll turn out into the best year of my life. I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. I don't know. But anyway, this is Cracked Open again. This is episode 10. It's on betrayal. My last episode on karma. I'm recording this one before that one's even released. That'll be released Monday. So you can, if you haven't listened to that one, you can go back and listen to that one. But anyway, this is Cracked Open as well. Like I say this all the time, where we dive into life's hardest emotions and discover the beauty that we can come from being broken open. And that's why I call this Cracked Open. If you're here today, you might be carrying a wound that feels fresh or old, or maybe both. Maybe someone you trusted shifted the ground beneath you, and you've been trying to figure out, how to stand again. And maybe that's you. But before I get into this, I just wanted to give you before I forget as I go on here, because I go down rabbit holes sometimes. I just wanted to give you a quick, there's a quick preview coming up soon with my friend Eric Karen, who's going to be my first in-house guest. He sent me over a video about his nonprofit work and the book that matters to him and everything else. And I'm also going to sit down with Pastor Brian. I'm going to link both of these previews and more details in the show notes for today. I want to sit with one, this one single thing though, betrayal, before I get start talking about them and what it does and how it changes you, and how you can come back to yourself without becoming the thing that hurts you. Okay, so that's what I want to get into. I just want to let you know the previews I will be putting probably in the description at the end of this when I'm done recording this. So anyway, let's get started here. We're gonna dig right deep into this. Excuse me, my voice. There's a cruelty to betrayal that isn't just about the act. It's about the breaking of a story that you were living inside. You build a life around a person's trust, around quiet mornings and promises and plans, and suddenly the script is torn out of your hands, and you can't do anything about it. And that's what betrayal is. It doesn't only change what happened, it changes the story that you were telling yourself about the world and about who you are. So betrayal feels like death without a funeral. Think of it that way. You don't just lose the person, you lose the future that you were building with them. You grieve someone who's still alive, you know. That's one of the cruelest things about it. You carry the memory of what you thought they were, and every day you're reminded that person you loved was not who you probably believed. Maybe they were, but maybe they're not. But I just want to say, you know, this early on, as raw and as angry as you feel, the pain you're feeling is real. It's valid, and don't let anyone rush you through it. You don't owe anyone grace before you've had the chance to heal. Give yourself permission to feel exactly what you feel. And that doesn't mean you stay trapped in it. It means you honor it so you can move through it honestly. That's the goal here. Betrayal is an action that violates trust. Sometimes it's indefinitely. It's secrets told, promises broken, trust traded for convenience, small little lies. It's being used. It's being made small until the house caves in. It's not just an action, but more than that. Betrayal is a moral earthquake. It displaces you. It makes you wonder if you ever really knew, your own judgment, you know. And people betray for many reasons. It's insecurity, selfishness, and that's a big one. So many people are freaking selfish. It's unbelievable. Fear, opportunity. Uh, I knew this one guy who had left his girl. They were together for so long, and because somebody, um, he was at a bar and somebody, kind of hit on him, and the words he said to me when I approached him about it, said, "How could you, do this that fast?" And it was like, "Oh, I couldn't let the opportunity, go by." But in the end, the opportunity is not really working for an opportunity for him like he thought. Kind of like the go back to the discussions we've had on the DM rebounds, but that kind of splashed back in his face after the dust settled and the shiny stuff went away. But anyway, opportunity, I just want to say that greed. A lot of people are just greedy. The need to be seen, or just a cowardly choice to take an easier path. It's kind of what it is. Sometimes it's like I said, they think it's an opportunity. Someone sees a moment and they jump. You know, Sometimes it's gradual. It's a pattern of small deceptions that builds until the house collapses. Often it has nothing to even do with you. That's the hardest truth to learn. When someone betrays, it's more about, their wiring, and it's not yours, it's who they are. People ask, whether, people who cheat, do they always cheat? And I've thought a lot about that. They're all patterns. Some people betray because they cannot sustain honest intimacy. They just can't do it. They don't know how to love. They are liars to themselves, before they are liars to you. They lie to themselves every day. They live with this, you know, but patterns aren't destiny. They're just warnings. So if someone's pattern is to exploit, then loving them will not fix them. You should not be a repair project for somebody unwilling to do the work, you know? So, and the body remembers, every single traumatic thing that you go through leaves a mark on your brain. It literally does. Um, I did some research on this, and I studied this word. It's called neuroplasticity. It means the brain changes with experience. You know, Trauma isn't just memory. It rewires how your nervous system runs. Betrayal triggers fight, flight, freeze. You might even feel like adrenaline surges, restless sleepless nights. I've had many of those. A knot in your gut that never leaves. Flashbacks. I have dreams. Things throughout the day. I've actually literally seen thought I saw, I don't want to, I was going to talk about this with Brian, like visions I've had, like a ghost. Like sometimes I literally think I see somebody in front of me. It's crazy, what the mind does in the nervous system. But, or it's just a constant, or it could be just a constant low level anxiety, that never quite lets you breathe again. So if you wake up, like at 3 a.m., for instance, with a knot in your stomach, um, and a movie of memories that you just can't turn off. Your body isn't being dramatic. It's just trying to protect you, I guess. That, it's the best way to say it. That's why healing is slow. It's not just mental. It's bodily. You need safe routines. I talk about this a lot and a lot of different things in my what I'm speaking, different subjects I'm speaking of. And maybe go for walks, just resting, just structure, get structure in your life. Start with, tiny things that you can do repeatedly. You know, Trust needs to be rebuilt on small little wins. One day you're going to look back and you're going to realize all those small wins, you know, um, add up, all added up. Excuse me. I hope I don't keep coughing through this. I'm going to get some water here. Sorry about that. Um, but let's talk about, betrayal and like, um, self-doubt. Betrayal doesn't only hurt because someone did wrong to you. It hurts because you trusted them. And when the trust is broken, you start to doubt yourself. You say, how did I not see this? Why did I believe them? Things they've said to you, that you put in your heart and you just really believed them because you had faith in them. What's wrong with, you say to yourself, what's wrong with me that, this just kept happening? It's grief trying to blame itself so it can feel in control. Those questions just poison our healing. So just listen to me. You are not the cause of their cruelty. Their choice, to deceive is on them. Your mistake, if it was a mistake, was human. You wanted to love, you wanted to trust, to be seen, and that's not weakness, that's bravery. So don't let your failure to value you become your verdict on their on worth. So they didn't break you though. They revealed parts of you that you still needed, that still needed healing. Pain has a cruel way of polishing our souls. It's terrible. So let me turn this a little bit to like go to like a spiritual angle on this, like God, justice, and karma. We talked about karma in our last episode. So let me just say this plainly, like there's an overlap between the idea of karma and biblical justice. Um, this is not a religious broadcast podcast. I mean that I always mention that. I do talk about scripture a lot. So if this is the first time you've heard me, I do quote scripture. I'm not a professional. I'm not a counselor. I am not uh, one of these coaches and life coaches or these things you see on the internet. Um, but I just wanted to quote. I'm going to quote some scriptures through this because those of you who listen to me, I always say I take my personal life experiences, my stories. Um, I listen to songs sometimes, different types of music. I'll be talking about a couple. I wasn't going to put songs in this one, but a couple came to me this morning. Um, One was sent to me. Um, Actually, I'm not going to put that one in. This girl I've been talking to sent me a nice song this morning, but I'm not going to put it in there. But I take scripture, I take research that I do on the internet, and I take worldly intelligence. I mix this all in, and I intertwine everything, and then I come up with these. I watch videos, and I do a lot of research on these. I have piles of notes everywhere. So Galatians 6:7 says, "A man reaps what he sows." That's not a threat. It's an observation about cause and effect. It's a moral. It's a moral architecture is what it is. Actions have consequences. So you can believe that those consequences are administered by a personal God, or they unfold through natural moral law. Either way, the core is the same, and choices count. But grace is also real. Grace means that you can be forgiven and you can begin again. You know, Karma without grace can feel cold and fatalistic too. So the Bible's message is both. The world responds to what we sow, and God offers mercy beyond what we deserve. You can hold both truths. Justice will come in some form, and um, you're also invited into mercy. So when you're betrayed, it's tempting to want immediate karma. We want the story resolved, the betrayer punished. It's just natural instinct. The scales balanced. But real life really gives us instant closure, like a movie. But trust this, pain boomerangs. It doesn't always come as public humiliation. Most often it returns in inner erosion, guilt, paranoia, restlessness, self-sabotage. I've watched it. People who live by manipulation build a prison of their own lives. That's what we call karma. It's not fun for them, and you don't have to watch it, for it to happen. Let time, you just do its work. Karma explains consequences. Grace explains second chances. Hold both and choose the one that frees you from bitterness. You know, control what you can. Is pretty much what I'm trying to say. Con, control the controllables. You can't control someone else's choices, but you can control your response. And that's where power lives. Keep your soul calm in the chaos, even if the whole world, falls to pieces. You can guide your own mind. You can decide, I will not act like them. I will not bitterness dictate my life. That is not passive. That is disciplined. That's discipline right there. That's the same practice. Take on responsibility. Clean your room, show up. When life is messy because of someone else's choice, your job is to reintroduce order where you can. You know, that will recenter you and that will make you whole. You know, um, don't just, you didn't just lose them. You lost the lie that looked like them. Think about that. You lost the lie that looked like them. There's a moment in every heartbreak where the story tries to turn you into a villain or a victim. So don't take either role. Take the third way. Witness. Witness what happened without editing the truth to protect anyone's ego, including your own. When you do that, the chaos starts to sort itself. Betrayal is brutal, but it's also a truth accelerator. It speeds up, the revelation of who is safe, who is not, and where you are abandon yourself to keep the peace. You know, that's why it can become a blessing, not because of the harm was good, but because the exposure was necessary. You know, and ask yourself, a couple of some simple questions though. Where did I override my gut to avoid conflict? Ask yourself that. What boundary would have protected me sooner? You know, what value did I betray in myself while I was busy forgiving others? These are a couple of questions you can ask yourself. Write the answers in plain language. Not poetry. Then build your life around those answers. That's how you turn pain into wisdom. That you can actually use. You know, um, here's the quiet miracle. When you stop arguing with reality, you free up wild amounts of energy. When rumination, fades, sleep returns, food tastes like food again. Your laugh shows back up in your own mouth and it surprises you. That's not forgetting, that's healing. I remember once I was speaking with this. It was sad. I went out with this girl and we were hanging out, and she just asked me a question out of the blue. She said, "Hey, when's the last what's the last thing that made you laugh?" And then again, I was thinking at first I was like, "Oh boy, is she one of these people that these manipulators that follow these courses and ask these questions? Tell me things about yourself. I'm going to tell you things about all these like crazy things that people get off the internet." But no, she just asked me a simple question, was it? And I had to sit back, and it almost brought me to tears. I couldn't think when the last time I was actually happy. But this was just something I had to think about. But it's just sad that that people can put you in these situations and things that get that are in your control. You think they're not, you know. But that's not forgetting anyway. It's all healing. And yes, karma works, but I'm not waiting, on it like it's entertainment. I've seen the inside, job it does, the suspicious glances, the shallow sleep, the scramble to fill a hole with novelty. I don't need, to watch the show. I'm busy. I'm building a life, that tells the truth. Blessing is not, a bow you tie, on top of the pain. Blessings a spaciousness that arrives when your integrity locks into place. It says it says I will not audition for love again. I will not ignore my body's alarms. I will not negotiate with disrespect. My standards are not anger. My standards are self-respect. These are things you just learn to you just learn and grow. And I'm going to talk about that later, about growing through this stuff. If a relationship returns, you know, um, it returns to me here in truth, in transparency, in consistent action, that matches words. And if it doesn't return, it's because I'm finally aligned with a future that can hold me. Either way, I win, not against you, against anybody, but for me. This is how when I'm saying this, I'm speaking like say this to yourself, you know, and to the listener you know, who's shaking as you're hearing this, because your hands still tremble when someone's name pops up, because you might be going through this and you're like, wow, this is exactly what I'm going through, because your chest tightens, where trust used to live. That sucks. This is where you trusted somebody right in that place, and now it's all tight. It's terrible. You know, hear me. You're not just behind. You're becoming. The seed does not look like the tree. Don't uproot it because it's small. Water it. Light it and guard it. And that's your job now. We don't get to choose every heartbreak, and we don't get to choose our harvest. I mean, I'm sorry, we don't get to choose the heartbreak, but we do get to choose our harvest. And I'm choosing clarity over chemistry. I'm choosing peace over performance. I'm choosing, the slow, gorgeous rebuild that turns a cracked heart into a clean compass. That's what I'm doing. So, what does betrayal, do to the betrayer? Now, let's talk about this for a minute. People who betray, they often pay a higher price than you see at first glance. And I'm not cheering for their downfall at all. I don't want that to sound like this. I'm naming, reality. Lies and cruelty cost souls. They erode trustworthiness, you know? So, you know, they eat away at conscience. They isolate. It's common to see betrayers repeat patterns until no one is left willing to stick around because it eventually happens. They might seem to win for a time, new relationships, the thrill, the immediate dopamine, um, that immediate dopamine rush of novelty, but the long-term costs of paranoia, lack of true intimacy, a life built on sand, those are real. That's the quiet internal karma that often follows. You just need to just stay honest and let life balance itself. Karma doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it whispers in their sleepless nights, in their quiet guilt, while you're finally at peace. You're fighting towards that peace and healing. They may look fine in public, but in private they negotiate with a conscience that no longer even believes them. They don't even believe themselves anymore. You know, so you have to reclaim your story. There's some couple of practical steps. The heavy heart. I mean, the heavy part. What do you do? How do you move? How do you move from rubble back into life? You know. So here are practical, you know, actionable steps that I've researched that work. This is stuff I've studied on the internet and stuff. They are not, these aren't slogans either. They're small, disciplines that rebuild a heart, and they're factual research shows that. I'll give you a couple. I can get my notes here. I wrote some of these things down here. You create safety first. If you're in a relationship where betrayal is ongoing or abusive, you need physical and emotional safety, sometimes distance, even temporary. It's not cruel. It's necessary. Name the pain. Don't sugarcoat it. Tell yourself the facts. They cheated, they lied, they left. Write it down. Who, what, when. You know, Naming organizes the chaos. And be careful what you get yourself into. Some people make rational choices. They. I know. I know. I'm just thinking of this one person who made a bad move, and she separated from her husband, and she moved somebody into her home, and thinking, okay, this is going to fill the space or whatever, and it ended up being an abusive relationship, and she got beat, and it had to get this person out of her house, and it's just crazy what people do. Another thing you do is journal the timeline. When you can put the facts on paper, you start to see patterns, not to torture yourself, but so that you learn the signs the next time. So, and then self bulletproof the boundaries. I mean, set bulletproof boundaries. Um, Set bulletproof boundaries. Decide what's non-negotiable. Like maybe no contact for a period, no attempts to fix them. Define your limits and keep them. There's another one. Repair your nervous system. Go for walks. Breath. People do these breath exercises. Sleep. Hygiene. Keep things in routine. This work is as important as any therapy. It tells your body you're safe again. Talk to somebody, not just posting, venting on social media, putting stupid pictures up, or trying to make yourself feel better. Find a trusted friend, a counselor, maybe a pastor. I talk about that a lot. Maybe a professional. You know, um, or just someone that you sit next to, can reposition your thoughts and stop the rumination cycle. Do small, trustworthy things like keep appointments, pay bills, you exercise, rebuilding trust in a world that starts with trusting yourself, for small things, rebuilding trust in the world, that starts with trusting yourself for small things, reauthor your identity, you know, say, I'm not what happened to me. Put that phrase somewhere where you can read it. Identity is everything. And betrayal can try to rewrite you. So refuse to let it. Practice gratitude, even if it's tiny. It sounds, trite, but gratitude changes wiring. Name one thing every day that isn't broken in your life. Pray, meditate, whatever you do. And I go to prayer I pray all the time. Whatever your calm is, opening a channel to something greater helps you, both surrender and recenter it. It isn't about passively waiting. It's about making space for healing, you know. So those are things I get off the internet. Some things you can do. So let's go into forgiveness too. That's the hardest freedom. Forgiveness is often sold like you must do this to be free, and that's partly true, you know, but not the whole truth. Forgiveness is a process. It's not an event. You don't forgive and feel fine the next minute. You decide to release the hold that their act has on you. You know, so forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. You got to remember that. It means that you refuse to live under the tyranny of revenge. It doesn't mean that you invite them back in or you pretend nothing happened. It means you choose not to let bitterness be your master. Forgiveness is release for reunion. Trust is built with receipts, not speeches, you know. So let me give you another. I look at my notes. I just saw another scripture that kind of just linked me when I read it. Just made me think of what I was just saying. Romans 12:17-21 gives us an instruction. Do not repay evil for evil. Overcome evil with good, and that's not weakness. That's strength. The image of heaping the burning coals. I talked about that in the last episode. On someone's head is it's not a manual for torment. It's an illustration showing that uncommon kindness can awaken conscience in someone, who expects hostility. So it's not putting guilt on them. It's just making them aware, I guess. So, and then you got to rebuild. Rebuilding trust is tough too. It's slow, it's measurable, and it's repeatable. If you choose to repair a relationship, and some of us will, or some of us may, understand, the rules. Trust is rebuilt by consistent action, not just apologies. Words without chains are just noise. If you choose to repair, that's okay too. Closing the door doesn't mean that you failed. I mean, I'm sorry, if you choose not to repair it, it's okay. Yeah, I'm saying it's okay because closing that door doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you're protecting yourself. You probably realized, um, reality. You not the illusion. You're starting to realize who somebody may have been that portrayed to be someone else. That you know their new beginning is built on your ending. So you know that's not love. That's escapism, I guess. So you know let's talk about the long game. Trusting the timing. So you think, you say to yourself, should I wait? Should I chase? I'll say this bluntly. Chasing someone who chose to walk away is like lining up your heart, you know, for a second wound. The long game is patience, dignity, self-restoration. If someone is meant to come back in a changed way, that's their work. Your job is to be whole enough that any reunion is a choice, not a rescue. Okay? You do not want to be with somebody out of desperation. You want to be with somebody because they are whole enough to be healthy with you, and they've changed, and they've repented, and they're sorry, and they want to be with you, and they know they want to be with you. That's the only reason why you should do this. Some people um, try to stay with people because it's an advantage. Like maybe they need shelter, or they're in a position like, wow, this is a good move for me. They're not truly in love, or this, I don't know if it's the word love. They're using situations for beneficial reasons. They're not. Then so you got to be very careful. There's a lot of dirtbags in this world, and you got to be very careful, and they're everywhere. So don't fight fire with fire either. Like the rage part. Anger is natural. Rage can be a useful fuel. But retaliatory acts can become chains. So we don't want to become our betrayers by imitating their cruelty. You know. Your power is your capacity to respond differently. And I've done crazy things before that weren't out of anger. The term "I'm crazy about you." You've heard that, right? It can actually make you do crazy things if you truly love somebody, because you truly love them in your heart, and your loyalty to your heart sometimes takes over your reaction. So the best thing to do is stop. You try to think for 1 minute if what you're doing, or what you're about to do, to be doing, is going to be beneficial or hurtful the next day. And I'm learning to do this, because when I reacted first in the past, it always hurt my situation. It didn't help it. It actually pushed people, in certain situations, has pushed people away, and it wasn't smart. And shame on them for being pushed away and not realizing that you love them so deeply that they make you crazy, and you might have done something that normally isn't you. But again, shame on them. Like I said in the last podcast, my dad talked about that. I quoted my dad about shame on me. Um, if you, I know, shame, if you cross me once, shame on me. If you cross me twice, uh, shame on me, whatever it was. So anyways, when the urge, to go viral with the secrets creeps in, don't do it. When you know things, and you can expose them. Exposure, it might be feel satisfying, but it corrodes your soul, and it drags you down. The poet in you knows this. Silence often carries more weight than 1,000 shouts. Let them live in their misery, and let karma play it out, and let them live in their guilt and their constant restlessness. You know, Don't expose them. Let their heart expose themselves, their black, cold hearts. Let them do it, and if I might say, if I could say something here about, I'd say, choose wise witnesses too. Tell a trusted friend, but don't weaponize your pain against your own future though. You got to be careful because some people, you just got to be careful what you say to. I have one person I speak to. I'm not going to say who it is. I trust her so much that what I say to her stays with us, and I've told her a lot of things, and she's told me things, and it's just a great feeling to have somebody like that. And it was somebody you'd least expect that I've become very close with over the last few months, but I've known them, for a couple of years. Um, but it's just awesome to have something like that. I could trust this woman. I know I can tell her anything. But anyway, when guilt, let's go into, when guilt haunts you, you got to forgive yourself, first. You may carry guilt and you might even think you should have done something differently, or you might blame yourself for not seeing it. So let me be clear. Loving somebody is not a crime. Okay? Being vulnerable is not a flaw. If you've made mistakes, well, we all do, you learn from them, but you do not let them define your worth. And like Jesus' example, teaches that, we're not defined by the worst thing that we've done. We are invested, into a restored, how can I say this? We, we're kind of restored into a new thing. I guess I should say, confess where confession is needed, you know, make amends where you can, and then you move forward, you know. Betrayal doesn't change your worth, by the way. It just exposes their character. What they did says everything about who they are and nothing about who you are, you know. So if I'm gonna give you if you need some people need closure and they need to confront, their betrayer. If you decide that you need to speak, to a person who betrayed you, you know, do it with structure and dignity. Say only facts. Avoid name calling. Use, I statements. I'll give an example. Like, say something like, I want to say what happened. I want to say, what happened affected me. When you did X, I felt Y. That changed my life because Z. I don't want to relitigate the past. I want you to know how deeply I was hurt. And I need boundaries now. I'm setting X as a, non-negotiable. If you choose to reconcile, these are steps that you have to take. If conditions are not met, bye Felicia, bye Sasha, I need to heal. That's what you got to say. You make it short. You validate your feelings, but you can't refuse to enter their chaos as well. And I won't bleed to prove I loved you. My proof was enough. My peace is proof enough. I knew how I loved in my heart. So you don't have to prove your value, to the person who couldn't see it. They already failed the test, and you were just the lesson. So reclaim your joy. Not a betrayal of pain. You know, some people, wait to be over it, or before they allow themselves joy. Don't punish yourself like that. Small pleasures are not betrayals of your pain. They are acts of restoration. So do the things, do the things that that refill you. Songs that make your chest open, walks that put your feet on the earth. Friends that make you laugh. Joy is not disloyalty to your grief. It's an oxygen for it. I've been having so much fun with this girl I've been talking with, and I I told her the other day. I said, every time I speak to you, bring like there's a peace about her, and it makes me feel, for that moment at least on that roller coaster, it makes me feel good about myself, not uneasy or awkward or anything. It's a great piece, you know. So just think about a couple of things like, you didn't lose them, you lost a lie that looked like them. Forgiveness is release. It's not reunion. Trust is built, like I said, with receipts, not speeches. Karma isn't loud. It's the sleeplessness that knows your name. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks, and you own the key. And I'm not praying for anybody's downfall. I'm praying for my alignment. Rejection isn't a verdict. It's a redirection, with rough edges is what it is. And my standards aren't anger. They're self-respect on schedule, right on schedule. That's how you gotta think. It's all about regaining yourself. So, just talking about what betrayal teaches us. So if we let it, betrayal becomes a ruthless teacher. It tears away illusion and it shows us um, who is real and who is not, and what we will or will not accept in our lives. That knowledge is a kind of currency. You just know it. You use it to invest in better people, better boundaries, and a better life. You are not ruined. You're just cracked open. And sometimes when something is cracked open, the light pours into it. And that's the painful hope of why we keep living. There's growth waiting in the broken places. And can how about this? Can betrayal be a blessing in disguise? Yes. Betrayal can become a blessing in disguise. Though it is initially painful, as it can lead to clarity, personal growth, and a deep understanding of trust. You can trust again. Even if somebody betrayed you that you trusted, you can find somebody with a pure heart, not a false heart. It can force you to reevaluate relationships, you know, free you from illusions and open the door to healthier connections and new paths. By revealing the true nature of some people, it allows you to move on from wasted time and energy, you know? And, I thought about that a lot too. You think, you say, oh, I wasted all that time, but it's not really wasted time if you learn and it makes you who you are. I just was speaking to my sister the other day. It just made me that this part made me just think this wasn't even in my notes or nothing, but I was thinking of one of my ex-girlfriends that um I was very close to really true love falling in love with. I did love her. She was a great girl, and um she was a little bit younger than me. Like I think she was like I want to say 10 years. I mean 15 years. I don't remember what it was. But anyway, people would say, "Oh, he's older than you, blah 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 blah," and I talk about how stupid people always bring up age and say, "Oh, and they actually put it they think they can put a number on it and say, "Oh, this guy's going to live for 10 more years because he's this age, or he's going to live 20 years. Oh, I'm going to live." Oh, really? Well, I just lost my granddaughter at 16 years old about a month ago, and life throws we don't have a guarantee. We don't know the day and the hour, so be careful when you think like that. But I just wanted to talk about this girl. Uh, we broke up, and I was went through a heartbreak, not like the one I just recently the one I'm witnessing, but um, I was busted up pretty bad, and she tried to come back twice, and one time she was in trouble, and she called me and she said, "You always said I'd be there for you. You'd be here for me if I was in trouble." She was in trouble, and I said, "Okay, listen." I went and helped her out. She needed a ride. She was stranded at this guy's house, and he was abusive and all this crap. I said, "I'm not going to get in any legal. I'm not going to get in any fights or anything like that. Um, but I'll pick you up. You're not coming to my house. I'm not going to your house. I'm not talking to you. I don't want to. I'm just going to give you a ride." And I was with my kids, and I left, and I did it. Anyway, she tried to come back again twice, telling me why the guy she was with wasn't a man. He was this, he was that. And I'm like, well, that's the choice you made. So why I'm talking about this is because I was with her for a while and I thought, wow, all that wasted time, but it wasn't, because I learned a lot in that. It taught me how to, it did teach me how to not trust. The only thing it did was that's why when I just trust somebody now, oof, it hurts really bad now, because it takes a lot for me to trust somebody from what I've been through. And this girl put me through some stuff. But just recently, my sister ran into her sister, and our families knew each other. We had, birthday parties. I remember having a 16-year-old surprise sweet 16 for my daughter, and she was there, and it was, her family was there, my family was there. So her sister ran into my sister and said, "Oh, how you doing? You remember me?" My sister said, "Of course I remember you." She said, "Oh, how's Glenn doing?" She said, "Oh, he's doing a podcast. He's been through, he's going through some stuff right now. A couple of losses in his life with his granddaughter, and this and that, but he's doing good." I talk to him all the time, and she said, "Oh, him and I'm not going to say her name, was so good together, and they fed off each other, and blah blah blah." And my sister said she felt obligated to say something to her. Say, how is she? And when she asked her, she said, "Glenn didn't tell you?" And she said, "Glenn hasn't talked to her in years." So what didn't Glenn tell me? She said she passed away. My sister was like, "What?" So yeah, she got this you know this something just happened to her, and it wasn't cancer, but it was fascinating. Cancer just hit her, and she went right downhill, and she passed away. And it broke my heart, because she was a nice girl, and it just didn't work out with us. But I felt terrible. But there you go. She was early 50s. You just don't know. You just don't know when your day's gonna come. So, in other words, I just wanted to bring that up, because the time I had with her, I just thought of her when I was reading this, because I had always said I was a wasted time with her, but it really wasn't. I learned a lot. I just wanted to bring that up. But anyway, betrayal can, let me get back to on track here, because I got off a little rabbit hole like I do. I always tell you I get back, though. I circle back. Just deal with me. And I do these take one, no editing, and I don't record them twice. I record them once, however they come out, whatever I talk about. That's how you're getting them for now. Um, and speaking of that, before I go on, me and Eric had lunch the other day, and we decided that when we do our broadcast, our live podcast, we're going to do it live, and I'm going to give you the time. I believe it's going to be November. I think it's November 12th, and it's going to be live. And I'll post it, and I'll post it live. Then I'll post the video later of it. But anyway, let's get back on track. Betrayal can provide a sharp, clear understanding of who you can and cannot trust. You know, saving you from future heartbreak. It can end relationships that were not meant to be long term, freeing you from investing more time and energy into people who do not truly value, or you truly know you're not going to end up with. So why waste, this betrayal can help you think about this the next time your next go around. So the pain of betrayal can also motivate you to become wiser, sharper, and more intelligent in how you approach future relationships and life's choices. Or you could be dumb and make bad choices, like a lot of people do. It can serve as a catalyst for change, pushing you onto a new path that's more aligned with your destiny or purpose. By learning to navigate the pain and rebuilding trust, you can become stronger and more resilient. Instead of dwelling on the pain, try to focus on the clarity and the self-awareness gained from the experience. Use this as an opportunity to understand and set better boundaries for the future. While difficult, forgiving, while difficult, forgiving the person for your own peace can be part of the healing process, allowing you to let go of all the bitterness. So what feels like a curse is actually a necessary step in a larger plan. It's a way to be redirected, towards your true purpose. Betrayal can be the worst thing that ever happened to you, or it can be the thing that propels you, you know, into the most powerful, fulfilling, and aligned life that you've ever had. You can fight. That's your goal. The phrase rejection is protection. It means that being turned down or pushed away can actually safeguard you from negative situations, helping you grow and redirecting you toward better opportunities. This perspective reframes rejection from a personal failure to a protection. I mean, to a protective or guiding force that can build resilience and it can lead to more suitable paths in your future. Rejection can prevent you from entering a job, maybe a relationship or a situation that isn't right for you, saving you from potential future disappointment or harm, because the disappointment's going to come and the harm's going to come. If you make these stupid choices, when one door closes, they say another one opens. Rejection clears space in your life for new and better opportunities to emerge. What they call moving on is just running from themselves in your direction. Each experience with rejection helps you develop strength and resilience, making you better equipped to handle future challenges. Rejection, it can prompt you to evaluate your values, your skills, your goals, leading you to personal growth and a clearer understanding of what you truly want. It can act as a gut check, forcing you to become more self-aware and reconsider your own biases and assumptions. Rejection is a form of, divine protection that directs you away from what isn't meant for you and towards what is. you know so how do you deal with rejection though? Friendships and relationships ending. The dream job, maybe it's a job that you were striving for, and you feel rejected about that. We're all human, and even the toughest and the most resilient among us can feel the sting of rejection. you know so so that's but but this, saying that, also think of this. There's great power. There can be great power, I should say, in the word no. See it as protection. Maybe the thing that you were striving for wasn't the right thing for you. Rejection is God's protection, and I really do believe this. Getting a no may feel hurtful at the time, but it may be just the thing that was needed, to course correct you or dodge something that, wouldn't have been good for you anyway. you know. So try to focus on the gratitude. When something knocks you off your feet, try to get up as quick as you can, and think of betrayal. Oops, just hit the microphone. Sorry. You know, think of betrayal to blessing. Think of this scripture. If an enemy were insulting me, I just looked at my notes as I said this. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could handle it. I mean, I could. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God as we walked about among the worshipers. So that's Psalms 55, 12 to 14. I just wanted to, I know that was in my notes. I just figured I'd read it. There's no hurt like, like the betrayal of a friend or somebody that you deeply loved, or completely trusted. I've seen it, I've lived it. The devastation, of an unfaithful spouse, or or someone you really love that stabbed you, in your chest. And I've personally felt the pain of being stabbed in the back by someone. I I thought, was a very trusted friend and everything to me. But it's one thing to be, deceived by an enemy, but it's another thing to be disappointed by a close person. You can handle a rejection by someone who hates you, but to be betrayed by someone who you thought loved you is totally different. That can destroy your self-esteem, your ability to trust other people, your willingness to allow yourself to engage in any close personal relationship. It really affects you. This is all on them too. It's the karma part, but there's simply no greater, human heartache in life. Relationally speaking is the word I want to say. That when someone that you love, you trust, and you have, opened yourself up to, takes your legs out from under you and sucks the air right out of you by rejecting you, or, deception, or when someone, goes from having your back to sticking a knife in it. It's just terrible though. So the worst thing you can do is harbor your hurt, because harboring hurt becomes bitterness, and you don't want to do that. Don't ever think that you have no one to talk to either, because you can always, if anything, if you pray, you can talk to God. You can think nobody will understand, but God always understands. He is always available 24/7. He completely understands, and I'm talking God, he can be trusted, and he can always help. You never bother God. In fact, I think it's the only thing that bothers God is when we think we bother God. Think about that. His shoulders are big enough to carry our hurts. You know, his ears are sharp enough to hear our hurts, no matter how big, and his hands are strong enough to handle those hurts. We have to remember this and we have to believe it. And I want to remind you that God understands betrayal because it happened to him twice in two different gardens, right? Garden of Eden, you guys know, the dew was still wet in the grass of creation. When the first two people he created, betrayed him, you know, the Garden of Gethsemane, the grass was wet from the blood drops, from the sweat, from the brow of the Son of God when one of his best friends betrayed him, you know. But out of both of those betrayals, came a savior, a rescuer, and a ruler who died on the cross, and he came back from the grave so he can take any betrayal and he can turn it into a blessing. He's been through it. Betrayal is one of the most painful experiences anyone can go through. It shakes your foundation. It leaves you questioning everything, and it can make you feel like your whole world has crumbled. You're worthless. All these things it does to you. But also what it can actually do, it could be the doorway to something greater. You don't deny the hurt, pretending everything is fine or excusing the actions of those who betrayed you. It means, recognizing that while you didn't choose betrayal, you do get to choose what happens next. So you can either, stay stuck in the pain, replaying what happened over and over and over again, or you can use it, as the catalyst, for a life that's healthier, stronger, and more aligned, than ever before. Betrayal forces you to confront truths that you may have ignored about your relationships, your boundaries, or even yourself. It can reveal areas where you may, have been overgiving or, tolerating mistreatment, patterns of, people pleasing, self-abandonment, or, ignoring red flags, a deeper need of self-love, self-trust. Like I said, stronger boundaries. Doesn't mean betrayal was your fault, but it does mean that you have an opportunity to rebuild in a way that serves you better. Towards that fresh start I was talking about. Sometimes we think we've lost the person, but in truth, we didn't lose them. We lost the trust that we had in them. When trust breaks, the bond dies on its own, and the person may still exist, but their place in your life silently just fades away. You connected with them, from the depths of your soul. But to them, it was just a game, or maybe they just used you for some beneficial gain when they were at the bottom of their barrel. They forget these things. You gave them everything with sincerity. While they treated the relationship as nothing more than a way to pass time. I guess I don't know when the truth comes out. It's always the heart that bleeds, though. The cruelest ones are not those who betray, but the ones who don't even pause to think how deeply their actions must have hurt you. That's the worst kind of person. So such people they're blinded by their own selfish wins, and they're completely indifferent to your pain. So while you sit there with the tears, are lost in the memories, they're already planning a future with someone else. The loneliness, this silence, it carries depths of sorrow. Only a broken heart can understand. But all that pain still doesn't outweigh living with the guilt, after the dust settles in their hearts. So just try to live with that one and think about that one. So what you felt was pure, but theirs was, was their self-interest. And that is the most painful part, being real and being thrown away. Feel like you're thrown in a dumpster, but time, keeps a record of everything. The one who caused you the pain today will one day find themselves standing alone, facing the same darkness that they left you in. Life has its way of balancing out these things. Your pain is not your weakness, it's your strength. You loved with all your heart, with your, without selfishness, without masks. That is a rare beauty. And one day you will rise again. You will. Right now, you may be broken. You may be crying. You may be alone, but you won't be forever. The very pain will make you stronger, wiser, and you will reap these benefits from it. Those who treat relationships lightly always end up alone. They may be with somebody, but they're really truly alone. And when the masks fall, when the mask falls and the truth stands tall. And the truth is, those who play with love always end up out of the game with superficial love. Betrayal can be a brutal teacher, and and a strange rescue. It clarifies, who is safe. It ends, what cannot hold you. It forces the boundaries that you should have said earlier. Rejection is protection. I said that earlier. It's not a platitude. It's often God's way of rerouting. It's rerouting that door that was slammed. The door that was slammed actually it's mercy with bad manners. Use the lesson, honor your needs. Require peace and harmony, and don't apologize for standards. And I'll leave you with a couple of songs that I'm going to put these in the description. I said I was going to mention them. I just looked at my notes. I don't know what time it is, but this one's been going on a while. Because this one's a deep one. This one's going to be a strong one. I'm going to take some heat for it, but it doesn't matter. I'm doing these from my heart, and cracked open is cracked open. So, like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. Talking to a friend of mine who was playing this last night at a gig, and he said, "I thought of you." It's like, really? And I used to play this song with him. So the lyrics may seem directed, at a specific person or a group, but many believe the themes are universal and it can apply to anyone who has undergone a significant life change. It's about the difficulty of waking up to a jarring reality, regardless of one's social status. And there's another song by Jelly Roll called "Lord, You Are My Strength." It's a Christian gospel song that draws heavily from biblical themes, particularly from Psalms 28:7. Let me see my notes here. To express deep faith and reliance on God. The meaning centers on finding strength, comfort, and joy in God, especially during difficult times, rather than from one's own abilities. The lyrics acknowledge God as the ultimate source of support, portraying him as a refuge and a provider of strength and victory. The song connects God's strength to joy and praise, meaning that the ability to rejoice and sing comes from the victory God provides. I was going to put another song by Jelly Roll that he does with Teddy Swims in here, but I'm not gonna put that one in here. In reviewing, in the review of the, and closing this out, I just want to, say this. God says, believe first, then you will see redirection may be protection. Let me say that again. Believe first, and then you will see redirection may be protection. Betrayal comes with a price. It may seem like an act of dishonesty, a selfish choice, or even a personal gain in some situations. Trust and honesty compromised stay forever. It all circles back. The echo stays in the psyche of the betrayer. It festers in every relationship going forward. Deceit over loyalty to a good soul pays a harder price or a harsher price. The betrayed pains, but the betrayed grows. The betrayer faces a haunting form of justice. It defines their reputation. The moral consequence is not an act of revenge. It's not a punishment by some external authority. It's the natural unfolding of justice written in the structure of life. Integrity is everything. It works like an anchor. Unstable people know none of this. Character prevails every time. The betrayed suffers temporarily, but the betrayer suffers long term when the illusions fade. Life is not about wealth or recognition or momentary victories. That seem to like give life's meanings, but your actions should align with your words, and your heart divided against itself. Let me repeat that one. I just read that one off this. I have a star here, so it must have been something I wanted to talk about. Your actions should align with your words, and your heart not divided against itself. Okay? Just recently, I had someone say this, and this, and this to me and to other people, and then pull the rug right out and switch the script totally. Terrible to live with yourself when that's your MO. But never lower your standards to the unworthy. As they cycle through their patterns, you grow and learn, and you move on to worthful blessings. Let me say that again. As they cycle through their patterns, you grow and learn, and you move on to worthful blessings. Balance will be restored. Nothing goes unanswered. Regret is a bitch. Okay? It never fades away. Never. It's life's justice. You know, they will pay the price of family, friends, people in general, catching on to their, and people in general, catching on to their, reputation. It's terrible to live with. They live with trying to silence this with distractions and phony victories, but inside, it's eating like a cancer in their soul. It's slow, but it's inevitable. The good news, after reviewing all this, is that if you've been betrayed, is that you learn to grow and you gain your self-respect back. You're moving on to better things, better people, gaining realities that you've never known because of this, of what you went through. You strip away illusions and you expose truth. You gain a deeper understanding of discernment. You also gain resilience and that you never knew you even had. You learn to not compromise your values for someone else's approval. The experience that you're going through can turn to gold. It really can. It might not look good right now. Like, things don't look good for me. I always say this, but I have a strong faith, and I know who I am in my heart. And as bad as things seem, and I do pray sometimes, and I ask why. I know God knows who I am, and I know He's got great plans for me, and I believe that, and I believe great things are going to happen. And like I said, betrayers can heal. People who betray you can heal. This is for. I want this to be positive for both people who are living in this rotten way and people who have been treated by rotten people. That this can all work out in both parties if through prayer and through self. Self-help is what you have to practice. But anyway, getting back to this, like I was saying, the experience can turn to gold. They can steal your heart or your soul, but they cannot steal your integrity. You will attract goodness, and they will attract karma. So celebrate your new beginnings. So I had something written here, a prayer. I don't know why I had this in my notes. It said a little short prayer, because I write all my prayers, and I've been saying these prayers. I don't know why at the end of my podcast lately, but this is one, I guess, that I must have reread, because I go back and reread this. So this is a short prayer that I'll just read to you quick. It says, Lord, tonight I come to you with a shattered heart. I'm raw. I'm tired. I don't understand why the people I trusted could wound me so deeply. I ask for wisdom, for steady hands to rebuild what's been broken. Give me courage to set boundaries, to choose peace, and to forgive when I am ready. Protect my heart from bitterness. Heal the parts of me that ache. If restoration is your will, let it come in truth and in time. If it's not, give me the strength to let go and walk forward with dignity. Thank you for not leaving me alone in this. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So, I just wanted to say that prayer as I get ready to close out here, because this has been a long one. Thank you for for listening to me today, and please subscribe to my podcast. Send this to somebody who might be fighting betrayal, or maybe is a betrayer, and they need to hear this. Thank you for please like it. If you like it, hit the like button, subscribe, leave comments, go on my Facebook page. I have a Cracked Open Facebook page now. Please like it, share it with your friends, trying to get the word out. Eventually, I'm going on a couple of other formats to help me get this out in places that it's not right now. So before I close, I'm going to give you, final encouragement here. Integrity is how you sleep at night. It's the quiet contract you sign with your own soul. It's not about being perfect. It's about being integrated, one story inside and out. Okay? So here's my manifesto right here. Tell the truth early. Lies are loans without predatory interest. Keep small promises. How you do Tuesday is how you do the vow. I think I meant to say today. How you do today is how you do the vow. Protect private people. If someone hands you their heart, don't turn it into content. Ask for repair, not theater. Apologies are receipts only when paired with changed behavior. Honor endings. A clean break is kinder than a slow bleed. Choose standards over stories. If the facts and your fantasy disagree, believe the facts. Be where your feet are. Presence is proof. Everything else is PR. I can bless you and still dismiss you. I can forgive you and still forbid you access. I can love you and still love. I can still love you and still love me more by walking away. Boundaries are not revenge. They're architecture. They keep good love safe and keep counterfeits outside. And to the betrayer, if you're listening, redemption is still possible. But it won't come from charm tears of time. It will come from truth-telling, from a transparency, and from unsexy, repeated repairs. Not for a week, but for as long as it takes. If you want trust, build it where you broke it. If you can't, release the person that you wounded and stop borrowing their future to pay yourself in the present. As for me, I'm done, outsourcing my piece. I'm done making a home in quicksand. So my life is under new management. My conscience first, chemistry second. I want love that doesn't need an alibi or phoniness or hiding and this and that. I want friendship that doesn't require, amnesia. I want a future that isn't allergic to the light. If that sounds like a lot, it is. But it's lighter than, living split. So just wanted to kind of leave you with that before I closed out here. So my final encouragement again, if you're listening and you're furious, that's okay. If you're numb, that's okay. If you're crying, that's okay. I promise you this: pain changes you, but it doesn't have to define your end. You can become kinder and wiser, not bitter. You can open again, not because you forgot, but because you've learned. Let karma do its work. Let time do its slow justice. Your work is to be faithful to your own integrity. Your life is a message. Keep it clean and keep it honest. And remember this, that the same storm that tried to drown you will one day teach you how to swim in deeper water. Karma is a thunderclap. It's the silence that they can't stand when the crowd goes home. So remember, your integrity is your legacy. You treat others as you want to be treated, because karma has no favorites. Stay true, stay kind, keep walking forward as life cracks you open. Integrity is how you sleep at night. Betrayers negotiate with the dark. The faithful rest, and choose the life that lets you rest. Thanks for listening. If this episode, like I said, landed in you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. If you want to send me, a question or a note, I read all the messages. We'll have Eric's preview and Brian's preview. About their guest spots on the upcoming episodes very soon. So check the show notes for the times and the links. Go on my my Facebook page and like it, and like my podcast, subscribe and all that. This has been Glen Nunes with Cracked Open. Until next time, take care of your heart, your peace, and your purpose. I love you, and we'll see you next week on Cracked Open. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Cracked Open. If today's episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need a little light in their own dark season. Remember, even in brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found. Every crack is a place where the light can shine through. Until next time, stay true, stay hopeful, and keep your heart open.